the war in the Middle East, where at least 6 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli air attack in the occupied West Bank city of Tubas. According to Israel, its military aircraft took part in 3 different attacks on Palestinian fighters who pose a threat to their forces in that area. Israel began a massive military offensive across the West Bank last week. That operation has killed at least 39 Palestinians and wounded more than 120 others. The military raids, mostly concentrated in the city of Tulkarem and Jenin, has been condemned by the United Nations and other Western countries. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reiterated and highlighted the country's goals for the war with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. According to the Prime Minister, Israel's aim is to only achieve 3 goals in the besieged strip. The first is to destroy Hamas military, the second to free all Israeli hostages, and the third to ensure Hamas never poses a threat again to Israel. Mr. Netanyahu also emphasized Gaza must be demilitarized, and that can only be made possible by controlling the Philadelphia corridor.
Now look at Gaza. Where is Gaza? Gaza is implanted in this tiny country, 30 miles from Tel Aviv, 40 miles from our capital, Jerusalem, 30 miles from Beersheba. These are 3 of Israel's largest cities. So we set, as far as Gaza is concerned, 3 war goals. The first war goal was to destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities. The second was to free our hostages. And the third was to ensure that Gaza never again poses a threat to Israel. And all 3 of those goals, all 3 of them, go through Israel's control of the Philadelphia corridor. And it's obvious why. You want to destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities, you can't let Hamas rearm. It's obvious. So you have to control the corridor. You can't let them have... By the way, it's not only to prevent them from terrorizing us, attacking us, it's also to prevent Hamas or any other terrorist organization from terrorizing the people of Gaza. Gaza cannot have a future if Gaza remains porous and you can enable rearmament of terrorists through the Philadelphia corridor. It's clear, Gaza must be demilitarized. And it can only be demilitarized if the Philadelphia corridor remains under firm control and is not a supply line for armaments and for terror equipment. I think that's clear to most Israelis, to all Israelis, because you all know and understand that the international community, including friendly countries under enormous domestic pressure because of the propaganda that's leveled against Israel and against them, there'll be enormous international pressure not to come back. What is their message? End the war. End the war. And so when we want to come back and resume, we'll pay an exorbitant price in many fields, including in the lives of our men. To come back, it's not just a military question. It's a military, political, strategic question. And we make that decision. We're not going to leave. 42 days, we're there. I don't want to leave in order to come back in when I know that we didn't come back in, and it's not going to take another 24 years to come back in, and God knows what price we'll have. I'm committed as the Prime Minister of Israel to 2 things. They're right here. The first one is to achieve the release of the hostages, and the second is to protect the security of Israel and make sure that we have no more hostage-taking, no more murders, no more rapes, and no more rocketing of Israel. Both of them. We have to have this and this together. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm committed to do.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Harim Khan, is all out to ensure his arrest warrant for Mr. Netanyahu pulls through, noting that justice must be served. Khan was speaking in an interview with the BBC. He said the warrant was important to show the court would hold all nations to the same standard in relation to alleged war crimes. The arrest warrant, which is not only for the Israeli Prime Minister, also includes Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as 3 Hamas leaders, 2 of whom have since been assassinated. In a wide-ranging interview, Mr. Khan explained the ICC needed to request warrants for leaders on both sides to ensure people around the world thought the court was applying the law equally based upon some common standards. Much earlier in May, Mr. Khan said there were reasonable grounds to believe these warring parties bore criminal responsibility for war crimes and crimes against humanity since the October 7 attack. Meanwhile, the Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has dropped a bombshell claiming Israel and its Western allies are responsible for every innocent death in Gaza. President Erdogan made this known in the capital Ankara while hosting his Egyptian counterpart Abdel Fattah al-Sisi for his first official visit to the country in 12 years. The Turkish president said in his words, Israel and its supporters are responsible for every innocent death due to hunger, thirst, or lack of medicine. He lauded Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S. effort to mediate in the ceasefire and hostage negotiations, saying Turkey supports the process and spars for efforts to end the bloodshed. President Erdogan noted that Turkey and Egypt both agreed to hold regular consultations to resolve regional issues, especially the conflict in Gaza. The United Nations Security Council on Tuesday held a meeting over the war in Gaza. Council President for the month of September, Slovenia's UN Ambassador Samuel Zborga, said patience is running out among United Nations Security Council members, and the 15-member body will likely consider taking action if a ceasefire cannot be brokered between Israel and Palestinian militants Hamas in the Gaza Strip. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, questioned how the warring parties in Gaza could agree to pauses in fighting to allow the vaccination of some 640,000 Palestinian children against polio, but not a ceasefire. The Security Council in June adopted Resolution 2735, which backed a 3-phase plan laid out by U.S. President Joe Biden for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of hostages held by Hamas. Mediation efforts, however, led by the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar, have yet to produce a deal between Israel and the militant group.
5 other hostages was brutally killed by Hamas. That he and Kamel and Alex and Eden and Ori and Almag would never be reunited with their families. The 6 hostages killed this weekend were executed at the same time negotiators were discussing the names of individuals to be released in a ceasefire deal. It calls into question the sincerity of Hamas negotiators, and it reveals yet again the ugly truth about the vile, depraved ideology that Hamas represents.
The diplomacy takes time. This is not easy. If it were easy, it would have been solved by now. So we're going to continue to work at this. We're not going to continue to cast blame, as some on this council like to do every time they come in the chamber. We're going to do the hard work of trying to get this deal done.
Israel is seeking to impose a military solution to the conflict by disappearing a nation. There is no denying these facts. From genocide to apartheid, Israel is showing the world its willingness and readiness to use the most despicable means to achieve its colonial aims. Dispossession, displacement, devastation, destruction, death. That is what it has been inflicting on Palestinians for decades. No one here is naive enough to believe that Israel will correct course on its own, will suddenly respect international law. You know the law. You know that Israel is breaching it flagrantly and shamelessly every single day. You have condemned, called, urged, demanded, to no avail. It is time for resolute action.
These 6 beautiful, innocent, heroic souls were executed by Hamas after more than 330 days of being held captive, deprived of sleep, food, sunlight, the most basic necessities. They dreamt of seeing their loved ones again, parents, siblings, friends, their babies. Last week, Hamas terrorists executed all of them. They shot bullets in the back of each of their heads. Hersh's mother, Rachel, spoke at his funeral on Monday, finding the only relief she could that her son was finally free. Think about that for a moment. A mother whose child has been murdered, finding comfort only in the thought that he would no longer suffer at the hands of Hamas, that he was beyond the reach of the monsters who are taking him.
The VOA's Ricky Rosson is in Tel Aviv for us. Ricky, we're trying to get enough responses from you as much as we can, because we know you're not the Israeli government. You're just a journalist who covers, the war between Israel and Hamas. But I know that the Israeli sympathizers in the UN Security Council, none of them have been able to sway Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a current ceasefire deal. Why is the Prime Minister impervious to the pleas from the global body?
I think that even the sympathizers in the Security Council, meaning the US and the UK, are beginning to tire of the rejectionism of Prime Minister Netanyahu. President Biden said he didn't think that Netanyahu was doing enough to achieve a ceasefire and a hostage release deal. And the UK just enacted a partial ban on arms sales, specifically offensive weapons, which Netanyahu is insisting on using to continue to attack Gaza. These criticisms actually give Netanyahu more strength in the eyes of his supporters here, because he can claim that only he can stand up in the face of international condemnation.
He's made that abundantly clear several times, including in the meeting he had with his cabinet. We just saw that a few minutes ago, where he was laying out his the three aims of the IDF, his aims of attacking Hamas. But I also want to draw your attention to one of the incidents that happened in Gaza yesterday. A young man was shot in the leg by IDF forces, and then coming closer, the soldiers shot him point blank, and the Gaza authorities are playing this up. They're playing incidents like these. I mean, if you go to certain news websites, this is a story. This is the kind of stories that you read. It's hard to confirm or deny, the identity of these individuals and what they were about, what they'd done. But does the IDF defend these types of deaths? Does it even address them?
It's hard to say what actually occurred in this incident or others, unlike events which incurred mass casualties, like the attack on Shifa Hospital or the attack on the World Central Kitchen convoy of the aid workers. The Israeli army doesn't always comment on every incident. They may respond that this man was carrying explosives, but it's hard to know the details. In general, the army defends its actions by saying that, and sometimes proving that Hamas is using civilians as human shields, and that it's impossible to always be able to avoid civilian casualties. In fact, the army spokesman actually distributed today some poignant photos of the tunnel shaft where the 6 Israeli hostages were found, and the shaft was built in the floor of a child's bedroom, and Mickey Mouse was painted on the walls. So the army is saying that they sometimes cannot avoid entering into and even killing children when their hostages are being hidden underneath the beds of those same children.
Back to the Prime Minister now. He talked about destroying the Hamas military, freeing all Israeli hostages, ensuring Hamas never poses a threat again to Israel. but the execution of these goals is where people have a problem with, and not just the international community. I think even Israelis have a problem with this, because so far the IDF has only been able to rescue 8 hostages since the attack on October 7. So how well do Israelis rate the Prime Minister on the achievement of these goals?
Well, according to polls, a large majority of Israelis want new elections in order to get rid of Netanyahu and his far-right government that has been pursuing this war for 11 months. And because they don't accept that after 11 months of fighting, causing thousands of deaths, disrupting Israeli lives with reserve duty, and the forced evacuation of thousands of citizens from the southern border near Gaza and the northern border near Lebanon, they don't accept that this is the way to achieve any kind of acceptable results. And they see that his continued military actions have not succeeded in freeing hostages, as he claims, only leading to more of them being killed.
Well, during his address to the cabinet, he tried to raise some sentiment about the Israelis being dispersed before Israel became a nation known as Israel. And he talks about how he does not want to come back in. Israel might not be able to come back, so there has to be military strategic plans in place to make sure that this disbursement, or rather this displacement, beg your pardon, does not happen for Israel. He talks about the propaganda against Israel, and I quite understand that in certain quarters, Israel is being demonized by certain leaders to make it seem like, Israel is going after innocent civilians. And I think that, for certain people around the world, that is the belief. When you see the protests in the US and in Germany, in the Netherlands, they're pushing this narrative that Israel is going after civilians. But how then does he, whip up the sentiment for Israel that this is a genuine war that he's fighting against a group of militants who do not want the existence of Israel?
I think that in the beginning of this war, when Israelis were reeling from the shock and the trauma of October 7th, people united behind him, even though right before the war started, right before October 7th, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis going out into the street to demonstrate against his government for being anti-democratic and extremist right-wing. But in the beginning of this war, there was a majority of Israeli public support for Netanyahu, for the idea that Israel had suffered such a huge attack. And even when they brought in the fact that it was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, people related to that. But now, and certainly for the last few months, of people seeing that Netanyahu's policies in conducting the war, in lacking any idea of what will come after, people have opened their eyes, and especially in the last week, although it's been going on for several months, the protests have been growing. The public protests have been growing. Hundreds of thousands of people going out into the streets and saying that they don't believe Netanyahu's claims that only his way of fighting this war, of continuing this war without any kind of ceasefire or hostage deal on the horizon, can bring peace and bring stability to this country and to the people.
And it is sad, isn't it, that only one man seems to have the vision. Well, he believes he's the only person who has a vision for Israel. Now, the ICC is insisting on going through with the arrest warrants on Netanyahu and members of the Israeli government. Could that be a motivating factor as to why Netanyahu insists on remaining in office despite the lack of support from Israelis?
I think that Netanyahu is more concerned with the domestic legal battles that he has been facing for years, that he has been able to put off during the course of this war and during the time that he is acting as prime minister. If he is forced to leave the premiership, then he will have to go back to court. There are several cases charging him with corruption and breach of public trust. And he's afraid of the results of these domestic legal challenges more than, I think, the ICC actions, which I think a majority of Israeli public and also political officials agree that a country's duly elected leaders should not be forced to face arrest warrants for their actions as leaders of a democratic country.
It's going to be a tough task for him. Thanks again, Ricky, for answering our questions.
Thank you.